I never imagined a hobby, just a crooked little love for ham radio and a 70-foot tower poking at the Montana sky would turn my life into a courtroom drama and a small-town soap opera. But here we are. And if you'd asked me 3 years ago whether I'd trade my quiet afternoons for headlines and subpoenas, I'd have laughed and tuned the dial. Then hung up on that laugh when Patricia Drummond walked up my driveway with a cream blazer and a lawyer on speed dial. My name is Franklin Yates. I'm 42, a civil engineer by trade, and 3 years ago I bought a slice of land just outside Great Falls that came with a private bridge over Bear Creek. An old wooden thing I thought was charming until it turned into leverage, battlefield, and eventually a peace treaty, all because I wanted to talk to somebody in Japan at 3 in the morning. The tower was legal, county permits, structural plans, the whole lot. And I built it because when you live where the nearest neighbor is a stretch of pines, the 20th century magic of radio feels like the only bridge to the rest of the world, literally and figuratively. So imagine my breakfast surprise when Patricia, with a brow like a question mark and hair that said, "I do my own drama," told me my antenna was an eyesore and that the Riverside Meadows HOA was prepared to fine me $500 a day until I tore it down, and then walked back to her silver Lexus like she just hung a new portrait in a gallery of grievances. I tried reason first. You always try reason first, especially when you're the guy who designs solutions for a living. I explained permits, FCC rules, how ham radio is protected, how the tower was engineered to survive things you don't even want to consider, and she quoted bylaws like Bible verses. Section 12(4). No structures over 20 feet without board approval, as if plat maps couldn't be read like maps of soul. I stood on my property line and said, calmly, that I wasn't in their HOA. I checked the plats twice before I bought the place to avoid exactly this sort of petty holy war. She didn't care. She had optics and apparently someone else with a legal degree in spite. 2 weeks later, I had a certified letter telling me I'd violated architectural guidelines and that fines would begin immediately. And when the courthouse didn't collapse at the absurdity of it, I called Rebecca Torres, the lawyer who'd helped me close on the property, and listened as she called their claims creative, which in lawyer speak is kind for they're full of it. I thought the cease and desist would shut them up, but people like Patricia aren't arguing about a view, they're arguing about control, and control isn't satisfied by reason. She camped at my driveway, every morning photographing my tower from angles like she was trying to prove gravity had changed, rallying a chorus of neighbors who'd been persuaded that a radio antenna could route a county from 15 miles away. Tom, my neighbor, the practical guy who drinks beer and has a toolbox that looks like it could be used to build a small spaceship, told me, grinning, that Patricia had asked him to sign a petition claiming the antenna was dangerous. He'd told her, politely, to take her petition and file it in the bin of bad ideas. The HOA escalated, emergency injunctions, claims about RF radiation and children at risk, letters citing non-existent nuisance precedents, and I kept thinking there had to be a sensible end to this. Sensible didn't exist in that weather. So I did the thing most of us avoid because we like being liked. I read the fine print on the deed again and remembered the bridge. The easement I'd given Riverside Meadows to cross Bear Creek was actually a revocable license, not a permanent right-of-way, and the deed said I could revoke it with 30 days written notice. I called Rebecca and asked, "Can I close it?" Her pause was long, the pause of a person who knows a legal lever when she sees one. And then she said quietly, "Yes, but it will get ugly." I sent the notice that Friday, certified mail to every home in Riverside Meadows. In 30 days, the license to cross my bridge would be revoked, except for emergencies. Suddenly, the optics changed because threats have two sides and leverage flips like a coin. At first, the calls were frantic, people begging, pleading for the convenience of a shorter commute. Sandra Mitchell, a neighbor who'd once brought me zucchini bread, begged me not to ruin school runs for kids. I told them the bridge was a gift, not an obligation. If their board would stop using community funds to sue me and drop the fines, I'd keep it open. They could have kept the bridge without the theatrics, but Pride had a mortgage and Patricia had already spent $30,000 of HOA reserves on legal bills, money supposed to go to snow removal and lawn care, not vendettas. Then came the twist no one expected, including me. While digging through public records to make my position airtight, I found Patricia's house on the market, a large contemporary listed at a figure that made my eyes sting. The listing photos carefully avoided showing my tower. Like bad landscaping, could be airbrushed out of reality. I also found the HOA invoices, 30 grand, give or take, funneled into legal fees defending what apparently was the aesthetics of one seller. Call it instinct, call it curious morality, but I realized she was using community money to fight her own sale, and once that detail landed in the hands of good people, the ones who like hot dish and honest conversation, the tenor of the neighborhood shifted. People who had been chanting slogans outside my bridge began calling me, quietly at first, then with the bluntness of those who'd woken up to their own bank statements. She spent our snow removal budget on lawsuits? Margaret, a retired teacher, said the words like a verdict. A recall petition took shape in a day, and 2 days after that, Patricia and 2 allies were voted off their board by a 38-9 margin. The new president, a retired engineer named Tom Westbrook, called to apologize and to assure me the fines would be dropped and the board would formally acknowledge my property's boundaries. I signed a written agreement as if I were signing a treaty. The bridge would stay open, the fines rescinded, and for a hot minute it felt like the world might return to its baseline of minor inconveniences. But people who hold grudges don't always stop when the votes go sideways. In the quiet after the recall, Patricia began filing false complaints. Petty police calls about poisoned flowers and menacing mail carriers, and the sheriff came by to remind me that county time moves with its own slow machine. Rebecca told me to document everything. I installed security cameras and filed for protection if needed. Then, on an ordinary Wednesday night, the ordinary became a nightmare. I drove up my lane and saw smoke twisting from the trees, the color of a bad dream, and firefighters, real people in turnout gear, including Derek Shunn, the firefighter who'd stood at the protest pleading for mercy, working my property. My ham shack, the separate building where radios hummed and maps lived, was on fire, collapsing in a charred proof that some fights go violent when civility fails. The investigator, Captain Reeves, later told me it was arson, accelerant patterns obvious, deliberate, malicious, and the security footage showed a figure with a gas can moving like someone who had rehearsed the steps. They executed a warrant the next morning at Patricia's house. A gas can in the garage that matched the footage, shoes with accelerant residue, and for the first time the county's slow machine found a smooth gear. She was arrested for first-degree arson. The county attorney called it attempted murder because the shack could have taken the house and life with it. I felt something like relief and shame all at once. Relief that the person who'd pushed us here would be held accountable. Shame that humans can slope from civil complaint to criminal behavior so quickly. The trial was a ledger of proof. Footage, invoices showing HOA funds poured into personal crusades, testimony from neighbors who'd been coerced or lied to, and the fire investigators' patterns. The jury didn't take long. 15 years, eligibility for parole after 10. A sentence that landed like a heavy book on a table. I watched her led away in cuffs and felt, truthfully, neither gloating nor glee. It was a hard, necessary thing, the law doing the thing it's supposed to do when someone crosses a bright red line. Rebuilding was oddly therapeutic. The insurance company moved with surprising speed. I rebuilt the ham shack better, installed more cameras, added a second tower for VHF and UHF, and turned what had been a place of solitude into a community resource. Riverside Meadows healed under new leadership. Tom, the retired engineer, proved to actually care about roads and kids and the less dramatic things that make a neighborhood functional. They kept the bridge. We set rules so this wouldn't happen again, and some of the same people who marched the picket signs now ask for tours of the shack because their kids, 3 of them, were studying for technician licenses. The moral, if you want it straight, wasn't a neon sign I slapped up at the end of the story. It was a slow dawning, one of those things that arrives in your chest like a cold wind and then stays warm because you move with it. That rights matter, and not in the abstract, your property, your autonomy, the ability to pursue what you love without intimidation. These are the quiet scaffolding of a life. But there's another truth that sat with me longer. Standing your ground isn't always heroic, and holding power responsibly is harder than exercising it. Patricia could have stopped at a conversation, at landscaping, at compromise. Instead, she weaponized fear and community funds and paid a price that ruined more than one life, including, ultimately, her own. In the end, the world wasn't perfect. Her house sold for much less. Reputations were bruised. People's trust took time to stitch back together. But the bridge stayed open. My antennas reached farther than before, and a small town learned the ugly cost of turning governance into vengeance. I slept the sleep of a man who had stood up, not because he wanted to be right, but because he didn't want to cede the liberty to be himself to someone who mistook authority for righteousness. So here's what I want to leave you with. Not a sermon, just a question to argue over in the comments. If you were in my shoes, would you have closed a bridge? Was I entitled to use leverage to defend a right that was legal and personal? Or did turning the inconvenience of 47 families into a bargaining chip cross a moral line? Was Patricia's punishment fair? Or did the system mete out too much for a hateful mistake? Tell me what you think. Share your own HOA horror stories, or times you stood up and felt like a coward afterwards, or times you gave in and later thought, maybe I should have fought. I'll read every comment, and if you've got questions about ham radio, property deeds, or how to handle a neighbor who escalates, ask away. I'll answer what I can. And if you like this story, share it with someone who needs a reminder that sometimes the small, stubborn things are worth defending. And sometimes the community needs to remember that rules are for people, not for power.